What's going on, everybody? It's Aurora here, coming at you with a brand new video. So as you know, since the January 2022 Forbidden Limited list, the format for Yu-Gi-Oh! Has changed drastically in what's good and what's not. This can be seen in videos like my competitive meta deck tier list and my hand trap tier list for this month of March 2022, which you should totally go check out if you haven't already, and of course in a lot of other statistics such as the YCS. With that being said, hand traps and meta decks aren't the only things we like to rate over here on the Aurora YGO channel, so today I'm going to be bringing you guys my Floodgate tier list for the competitive March 2022 format. Before we get into the video, keep in mind that this is based off personal opinion, the opinions of other content creators and people online, statistics, and etc. And so, if you feel the need to attack anybody, either me or other content creators or people in my comments section, just don't, because it's completely unnecessary, and at the end of the day, it's just a card game. As well, for the ratings here for this tier list, we have Open the Gates, which is basically the ones that you really don't want to be caught without if you can afford to play it. We have Strong AF, which are really powerful, but they're a bit niche, but overall, you're really not gonna hurt yourself playing it. All Right means they can be pretty situational at times, but they can win you games that you shouldn't. And then MST Negate is basically the ones that aren't really worth running right now. And so with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get onto my Floodgate tier list for the March 2022 Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. So first up, we have Anti-Spell Fragrance. And so Anti-Spell has been a pretty popular card in the last format, back when Imperial Order was still legal and Anti-Spell served as a second and third copy of it. However, right now, I feel like it's actually lost a little bit of strength that it had in the format before. So I'm going to put it in the Strong AF category. Basically, in this format, we're moving back towards hand traps and away from board-breaking cards such as Dark Ruler no more, even though we are still playing some. And, you know, Anti-Spell really only works against things like Dark Ruler no more when it comes to setting up your combos. With things such as Forbidden Chalice, Droplet, and of course, Emergency Teleport in the pile decks, not really caring about Anti-Spell too much, if at all. I feel like Anti-Spell has definitely fallen a bit out of favor compared to some of the other Floodgates you could play. However, that's not to say that Anti-Spell is a bad card. I still feel like it is very strong if your deck can afford to run it. I'm personally going to be running it in Dinomorphia once the support comes out because I feel like it's very strong there. And it can steal you games, such as the Sky Striker matchup if they don't draw any out, and it's going to be super powerful in the upcoming format after Tactical Masters once the Mr. Rune archetype comes out. And so while it's not seeing the amount of play as it did last format, I do believe Anti-Spell is still a very good card. Next up, we have Artifact Lancia, and that's going to be our first in the Open the Gates category. Lancia, of course, as I talked about in my hand trap tier list, is quite a disruptive hand trap, and considering that it hits just about every single deck aside from Prank Kids in the meta right now. And so you're really not going to see any sort of, like, bad situations when you have Lancia, unless you draw multiples, I guess. But overall, Lancia is going to affect just about any good deck right now, unless you're playing the Prank Kids matchup, but then again, a lot of other things affect the Prank Kids matchup, so don't worry about that. And I'd honestly say that Lancia is main deck worthy if you're looking for hand traps to main other than Ghost Ogre. There's not really much to say that I didn't already say in my hand trap tier list, which again, you should go totally check out, by the way. Otherwise, I feel like Lancia is definitely self-explanatory. So next up, we have Artifact Scythe, which was actually the thumbnail of my last Floodgate tier list all the way back in November, I believe, when my channel was on that massive growth spurt. And I'm going to put this at the top of our Open the Gates category. Yeah, considering that Scythe Lock is the main strategy of just about every top deck right now, aside from, like, Prank Kids, which, again, they're kind of like the outlier. I feel like Scythe is definitely super strong to the point where every single deck almost wants to play it. That clearly means that clearly says something, you know. I feel like Scythe is definitely very powerful against just about everything right now. The only outliers being something, maybe like Eldritch that doesn't really need the extra deck, and hell, even Eldritch is Scythe locking right now. And it really shows when everybody is preparing for Scythe and then using Scythe as well. So overall, I think Scythe is definitely one of, if not the most powerful Floodgate right now, simply due to the fact that it has such an overwhelming presence and people are so willing to play cards to go specifically against it. Next up, we have Dimension Shifter, and I'm going to put Dimension Shifter... Do I want to put it above or below Lancia? I'll put it above Lancia because unlike Lancia, who is unable to affect one deck or, you know, 1.5 if you count Virtual World, not really needing to banish too much, I feel like Dimension Shifter really just hits everything. Like, if your deck can play Dimension Shifter, I don't think there's a reason that a deck would not be playing it. Like, I think... So, like, a few decks that I can think of that play, obviously, are Bird Down, being Flunderies, Mutant, Madolche, even. I feel like all of those decks, knowing that they can play Dimension Shifter, are playing it because they know they can play it. and because of how destructive that Dimension Shifter can be. Again, this is another thing that I talked about in my hand trap tier list a little bit ago, but I feel like there's a bit more to say in terms of the Floodgate aspect, specifically in that most decks can't play around Dimension Shifter. If you think of Tri-Brigade, they can't play around Dimension Shifter. If you think about Virtual World, they can't really play too much around Dimension Shifter outside of using Chuchi. If you think about Pile, they're going to have a bitch of a time playing around Dimension Shifter because they're going to lose their desk bot and they're going to lose their Fusion Destiny materials, etc, etc. You think about Phantom Knight, they don't even, like, want to think about Dimension Shifter. And of course, with things like Called By still at 1, unless you're Lanciaing on your turn, Dimension Shifter is probably going to screw you over. And if you Lancia on your turn, well, great, now you can't banish the cards that you want to banish. So overall, I think Dimension Shifter is an absolutely busted card that probably should not exist, especially considering a deck like Flunderies can abuse it multiple times. And so overall, I definitely think that it's one of the things that you should run it if you can. Next up is Droll and Lockbird, which is another thing I talked about in my hand trap tier list, and I believe is the second to last one, with the last one only being in one of them so far, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to put Droll in the top of the strong AF category, above Anti-Spell. I feel like Droll is very strong right now, considering that it stops the plays of a deck after it uses the Brave engine and adds things. Of course, being able to stop something like Prank Kids after they use Place so they can't search off of Dodo or anything like that, or draw off of Roxy's. Virtual World after Qinglong, even though it doesn't do too much after that. Overall, it hits a good few things. However, I don't think it's strong enough to warrant Open the Gates right now. As opposed to last format where Droll was kind of just a death sentence to everything, I feel like right now, considering a lot of decks would prefer to either dump, banish, special from deck, special from hand, and use the extra deck for things, they don't really search as much, and if they get Drolled, they can usually play around it in some way. Other than decks that like to draw and search a couple of times after using the Brave engine and then using the Droll as soon as they use the Brave engine, I feel like it's not really as prevalent as it was in the last few formats. That's not to say it's bad right now, obviously. It's still really, really powerful, especially against things like Sword Soul as well, especially if they have to start with Emergence or Vessel. Then they're basically locked out of using their Moye, using their Chi Xiao, using a Desires if they don't start with it. Overall, they're going to have a pretty bad time. And so I think Droll is very strong, though it's not as strong as these three, but I would definitely not mind putting it in my side deck if I had the space. Next up, we have Abyss Dweller, and I don't really want to put another thing in the strong AF category, so I think I'm going to put Abyss Dweller at the top of all right. So Dweller has always been a Floodgate that's been pretty relevant as long as your deck can summon it, and that's the big thing right now, is as long as your deck can summon it. There's only like a couple of decks I can even think of right now that can actually even summon Abyss Dweller, being Prank Kids with Parallel Exceed, basically just things with Parallel Exceed, honestly. But even then, they'd probably rather just go into something like a Baguska. And so Abyss Dweller's sort of fallen out of favor, less because of its power level, and more because a lot of decks really just can't go into it right now. It is very good against certain decks and will basically win you the Prank Kids and Phantom Knight matchups for the most part. However, it's really just the issue of getting it on board, as well as having other disruptions, because if you don't have other disruptions, well, they're probably just going to summon a DPE and just destroy you. So overall, Dweller is still a great card. However, I don't think it's that great right now. Next up, we have Gozen Match, and I'm going to put Gozen Match, I'm going to put it just below Anti-Spell because it's a bit more niche. So if you haven't noticed lately, Konami has been printing a lot more archetypes that have different attributes. Fire, water, dark, light, earth, wind, all of those things. I feel like because of this, Gozen has become very strong. I think I said this in my last tier list actually as well, because that was a little bit after Sword Soul came out, which is another example of an archetype that has multiple attributes. And so I think Gozen is really strong in decks that can use it against just about every good deck right now. We have Prank Kids, that's all different attributes. We have Tri-Brigade is still clinging to dear life. We have those all having different attributes. We have Sword Soul, of course. We have the Pile deck summoning a bunch of different things. Because even if the archetypes themselves don't utilize different attributes, the extra deck probably does. So I think Gozen is super strong at being able to lock down a lot of decks and prevent them from going into too much extension. And they might either be able to not play at all, or they'll have to go for a slightly different play in order to play around the Gozen. So I think if your deck, usually a rogue deck, is able to fit it in, I don't think you're going to have any sort of issues at all playing this card. I think it's great. So next up we have Inspector Border, and I'm going to put Inspector Border as our very first card in MST Negate. So Inspector Border really hasn't been good for quite some time now, in my opinion. with Link monsters being so easy to bring out and just being able to punch Inspector Border super hard, as well as just inherent summons being all over the place, and just everyone being able to play some sort of out, being, you know, Fusion Destiny, just getting a DPE that can punch it or pop it. We also have just Chalice, Droplet, Imperm. There's just so many things that just stop an Inspector Border, and Inspector Border usually hurts the, like, the controlling player more than anything because of that, because their deck is most likely built around it. It sees its use in slower formats, but right now, our current format is just incredibly fast, especially with the pile decks, and I feel like something like Inspector Border just won't be able to keep up due to all the varying different fusions, synchros, links, Xyz, all of them coming out on board, and so I think Inspector Border has just fallen a bit behind for now. So next up is Mystic Mine, and of course, you know, Mystic Mine's gotta go in that strong AF category. So Mystic Mine has been super toxic and annoying since its inception, all the way back in Dark Neostorm, I think it was, and that was like, man, that was like 3 years ago almost? Oh, I feel old. And especially with the banning of Imperial Order on the last Forbidden Limited list, Mystic Mine has only gotten stronger. Most decks still aren't main decking actual back row removal, and overall, unless the opponent has a DPE or something they can chain immediately to blow it up, or something like Sword Soul with Blackout, they're going to have a bitch of a time trying to actually even out the Mystic Mine, while you're basically going to be sitting there just drawing and drawing your resources until you feel like it's time to actually start playing the game properly. I'm personally on the train of Mystic Mine needs to go. I personally I feel like it's not that great of a card design. I think it's very unfair and unfun for the most part, and so I just don't think it should exist. Tell me what you think about it in the comments below, though. For sure, I do want to hear other people's opinions. But yeah, until Mystic Mine actually decides it wants to take its leave, I think it's going to be staying in the strong AF category. You could probably even warrant putting it in the bottom tier of Open the Gates, but it's definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. So next up, we have Rivalry, and I'm going to put Rivalry at the top of all right. So it's a bit specific, but it's very powerful in certain situations. Decks like Prank Kids, Tri-Brigade, and of course Pile all would really hate to be under a Rivalry, especially if you are playing a top tier deck that can utilize it, especially because if they're left with one thing and they have no way of outing it, they're going to be screwed giving you enough time to just continuously draw your resources, much like Mystic Mine, until you can go ahead and just OTK with something like Access Code. It is a more of a niche card, such as Gozen Match, in which mostly rogue decks utilize it. However, some of the top decks can currently either play under it or utilize it. We have something like Sword Soul, which is all Worm. Personally, a good friend of the channel, M Rocket, who I'm going to try to get his Sword Soul deck profile on the channel soon. I'm sorry I haven't gotten it sooner. He personally plays it as a side deck card, and it wins him a lot of games that he should not. Even something like Phantom Knights could actually play it if they so choose, because, yeah, they're all warriors. And you know what else is a warrior? Phoenix Enforcer. So if it actually becomes a problem for them, they can just go ahead and use the DPE to pop it. Because of this, it's the main thing keeping me from putting it in the strong AF category along with Gozen, because there are top tier decks that can either play around it or either play it themselves as well. Something like Virtual World also probably wouldn't care too much, considering that they only play 2 types and not multiple, and so I feel like it's a bit situational, but it can be used in a very efficient manner. Next up, we have Skill Drain, and you already know after that Unlimit that Skill Drain is going up in the Open the Gates category. Skill Drain is stupid. I have no idea why Konami decided this card could come to 3. It's just ridiculous, especially after all the complaining from Master Duel. It's just, wow. Why? I mean, I guess I get that it's to push sales for the hidden arsenal, but come on, you have created such a toxic game state. So, ignoring the fact that Eldritch can utilize it and just not care, we also have something like Prank Kids. Remember that Skill Drain's wording says while they're face up on the field and not negate its effects, period, meaning that things that tribute or remove themselves from the field for cost, Battle Butler, Dodo Doodle Doo, Weather Washer, Rocket Ride, and Bow Wow Bark, all resolve, even under Skill Drain. And so basically, you're gonna have to play through a Skill Drain while the Prank Kids player just has a field day. Even in some really bad decks, Skill Drain ends up being a win more button. Personally, last night, as of recording this video, I was at my smaller locals, and someone who literally hadn't played the deck he was playing before, it was Blue Eyes, he literally just picked it up, almost got game 1 strictly because of Skill Drain, because he was sitting on a 3k Azure Eyes against my 3k Shuri. If I didn't play Forbidden Chalice to make sure it gained more, I would have probably just scooped because I had no way of outing the Skill Drain. And the main thing is, it's not like how it used to be where, yeah, if you finally get rid of the skill drain, you don't have to worry about it anymore. Well, if you finally get to an out for the skill drain, they're probably just gonna flip another and fuck you. I think this was probably the worst hit on the last Forbidden Limited list, so it's probably going to be up and open the gates for quite some time until it actually dies down or gets hit back to 1 again. I want whatever the employees at Konami are smoking because clearly it's messing up their head a lot. So next up we have Summon Limit, and Summon Limit is a very strong card, don't get me wrong, but there's not very many decks that can actually utilize it properly right now, in my opinion. Not to mention the fact that with something like DPE, they can just go ahead and pop it and then not really care. I gotta think, it's just like, decks can't really utilize it too well right now. I will put it in the alright category. I think it affects more decks than something like Abyss Dweller, but I don't think it's that crazy, especially considering it's just so hard to actually utilize yourself unless you're playing a very specific control deck. Summon Limit is a pretty good card, don't get me wrong, but considering the current format, I feel like the only deck that could probably afford to play it is Eldritch, but as we've seen, the regular build of Eldritch is not that great, and people are actually playing the Cyberse build now, which I guess just Scythe locks, which is cool, whoop-de-ding. And even pure Eldritch would like to summon their bodies, they're in their trap cards a few times per turn, and their Golden Lord, and so it can also hinder them as well. And so Summon Limit, while it's great, I'm going to keep it in the alright category just for now. Next up we have There Can Be Only One, and There Can Be Only One I think is still a very powerful card, and I'm going to actually I'll put it above Anti-Spell in the Strong AF category. So There Can Be Only One is back in a situation where some top decks can actually play it and utilize it against other top decks. The biggest example being, of course, Prank Kids, who, while they do prefer skill drain now that it's at 3, There Can Be Only One is still very strong in the deck considering that they play a bunch of different types. It's very good against things like Sword Soul, against, sorry, I have to think of the decks off the top of my head, against Phantom Knights, against Pile. It's very strong against all of those strategies overall, and it can be utilized by some higher tier rogue decks as well as some meta decks themselves. Even something like Virtual World can actually play it because, yes, that means they have to accept only having 1 Worm and 1 Psychic on board at the same time, but I don't really think it's that big of a hindrance to them, and I've seen that personally myself. It's probably one of my most hated Floodgates of all time, considering that most of my decks end up actually losing to it, but I don't think it's gonna go anywhere anytime soon, so it's gonna stay in the Strong AF category for now. So next up we have Token Collector, and it feels so weird putting a card as silly looking as this here, but I'm gonna put Token Collector above Skill Drain and Open the Gates. So Token Collector is very, very strong right now. Not just thinking about the adventurer token stuff, we also have Sword Soul, which this deck completely destroys, and we have the Pile Dex Aurora combo that this completely destroys. Being able to shut down 3 key features of so many decks is very, very strong, and then not only destroying all tokens that are currently on the field, but preventing the tokens from being summoned afterwards, which is why I counted this as a Floodgate. It's another card that I mentioned in my hand trap tier list, but I think Token Collector is strong enough to warrant being on the Floodgate tier list as well, especially in such a high category. It gives so many decks that don't utilize Sword Soul cards or the Brave/Auroradon engines just an ability to completely stomp the decks that do utilize that, forcing them to fall back on some different plays. So overall, I think Token Collector is a very, very strong card, and it warrants being up in this spot, and until we actually get a format where there's no tokens anymore, I think it's going to stay here for quite some time. And then finally, we have Winda. Man, poor Winda. So, if you'll notice, Invoke Dogmatica Shaddoll hasn't been doing too great lately in terms of big event success. I don't even think it cracked top 16 or top 32 of the YCS, which is very unfortunate as someone who really enjoys the deck. But honestly, I'm gonna have to put Winda in the MSC Negate, not just for those statistics alone, but also, let's see, we have Imperm, we have Fusion Destiny into DPE, run Winda over. We have Chalice, we have Droplet, we even have people still playing Dark Ruler. There's so many ways to get rid of a single Winda, and then after that, all they're stuck with is a Mechaba, and of course, just a Mechaba isn't going to do much. And I know other decks can use Winda, but those decks are so irrelevant right now, unfortunately, that it's really not even worth bringing them in. So Winda, while she's good if she goes off, isn't probably going to go off too often. But with that being said, that's going to have to do it for the tier list. I'll give you a few moments to look at it in all of its beautiful glory. Definitely tell me what you think about the tier list in the comments below. Is there any Floodgates that I missed? I tried to do the ones that are most generic or highly used as possible. Is there anything that I did wrong in terms of my placement? Is one of them too weak? Is one of them too strong? Just be sure to let me know. Just know that I will be a little bit defensive about my opinion. But overall, I think this is a fairly accurate one in terms of my personal opinion. I think that all of these definitely have a place. Maybe some of them could go one up higher or one down lower. But again, it is all due to preference, due to matchups, due to what deck you're playing, and things like that, of course. But with all that out of the way, that's gonna have to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like on us, helps put this video and the channel into the YouTube recommended. And if you really liked it and you want to see more awesome Yu-Gi-Oh content, like the rest of my tier list and other awesome stuff for this current month, then perhaps consider subscribing, because we've reached our goal of 1,000 subscribers and gotten monetized, and it would mean the world to me. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.